The first time I saw Patricia Wilson standing on my dock with her arms crossed and that smug expression, I knew my peaceful weekends on Lake Washington were over. The Seattle morning sun glinted off her oversized designer sunglasses as she blocked my path to my boat, a 26-foot sea ray that represented 3 years of savings and the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. "Excuse me," I said, balancing my cooler and fishing gear. "You're on my property." She didn't budge. "I'm Patricia Wilson, president of the Lakeside Shores Homeowners Association, and you, Mr. Brian Quentin," I replied. "I've lived here for 5 years." "Well, Mr. Quentin, are you aware that your boat exceeds our community guidelines for watercraft? The HOA has specific regulations about boat size and usage." I set down my gear. There were no restrictions when I bought this place. I've checked the original covenants. Patricia's thin lips curved into what I can only describe as a predatory smile. "The board voted on amendments last month. You should have attended the meeting." That was the beginning of my nightmare with the Lakeside Shores HOA, a battle that would consume the next 6 months of my life and ultimately end with flashing blue lights and a pair of handcuffs, though not on my wrists. I've always been a rule follower. My job as a structural engineer demands precision and adherence to codes. When I purchased my lakefront property in the quiet Lakeside Shores community, just outside Seattle proper, I meticulously reviewed all HOA documents. The community was small, just 28 homes with shared access to Lake Washington, and the HOA seemed reasonable. There were standard rules about exterior paint colors, lawn maintenance, and holiday decorations, but nothing prohibiting boats or water access. After that first confrontation, I pulled out my HOA documents again, searching for anything I might have missed. Nothing. The next day, I requested copies of the amendments Patricia had mentioned. 3 days later, a manila envelope appeared in my mailbox containing a single photocopied page with a new section titled Watercraft Restrictions. According to this document, boats exceeding 20 feet were prohibited from launching from community docks between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekends, to reduce congestion and noise pollution. The document had signatures from the board members, but no record of a community vote as required by our bylaws. Something wasn't right. The following Saturday, I arrived at my dock at 7 a.m., determined to get my boat in the water before the supposed restriction kicked in. As I backed my trailer down the community boat ramp, a silver Mercedes SUV screeched into the parking area, blocking my path. Patricia Wilson emerged, this time with a clipboard and a man I would later learn was Gordon Hayes, the HOA vice president. "Mr. Quentin," she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet morning water. "I specifically informed you about the restrictions." I stayed in my truck, window rolled down. "I'm launching before 8 a.m., which complies with your new rule." She stalked toward my vehicle. "The board has voted to extend the hours. No launches before 9 a.m. now, noise concerns." I glanced around the empty launch area. "There's no one here to disturb, Patricia. It's Mrs. Wilson to you," she snapped. "And rules are rules." I could see other homeowners beginning to gather at a distance, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. Nobody stepped forward to support either side. "May I see documentation of this new rule?" I asked. Gordon cleared his throat. "We haven't distributed the minutes yet, but the vote was unanimous." "Then it's not enforceable," I replied, putting my truck back in reverse. Patricia stepped directly behind my trailer. "Move your vehicle forward immediately, Mr. Quentin, or I'll call the police for reckless endangerment." I hit the brakes, not wanting to escalate the situation. "This is ridiculous. You can't just make up rules on the spot." But that's exactly what they were doing. I reluctantly pulled forward, knowing I couldn't risk hitting her, even accidentally. As I parked my truck and trailer, Patricia stood at the boat ramp entrance, arms crossed triumphantly. That night, I researched Washington State HOA regulations and learned that all rule changes required proper notice, documentation, and often a community vote depending on the bylaws. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board requesting verification of the amendment process and announced my intention to launch my boat the following weekend in accordance with the original covenants. Patricia's response came within hours, a terse email stating, "The board stands by its decision. Violations will result in fines of $250 per incident." I didn't back down. I spoke with neighbors, discovering that several others were unhappy with Patricia's heavy-handed approach but were afraid to challenge her. Nelson Tucker, who lived 3 doors down, confided that Patricia had targeted several homeowners who opposed her in the past, finding minor covenant violations and issuing relentless fines. "She's been president for 3 years running," Nelson told me over beers on his deck. "Nobody runs against her because she makes their lives hell if they do. My advice, sell the boat or keep it at a marina." "That's not happening," I said. "I bought this place specifically for the lake access," Nelson shrugged. "Then you're in for a fight." The next weekend, I arrived at the boat ramp at 6 a.m., hoping to avoid another confrontation. The sun was barely peeking over the eastern shore as I backed my trailer toward the water. To my astonishment, Patricia's Mercedes was already parked sideways across the ramp entrance, and she sat in a folding chair reading a magazine, a thermos of coffee beside her. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, getting out of my truck. Patricia lowered her magazine. "Good morning, Mr. Quentin. Beautiful day, isn't it? How long have you been here?" "Since 5 a.m., she replied smugly. "I had a feeling you might try to circumvent the rules." "This is harassment," I said. "You can't physically block access to a community amenity." "I'm simply enjoying the morning by the lake," she said. "It's unfortunate that my car happens to be parked here." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes watching us from their decks. No one intervened. "I'll call a tow truck," I threatened. Patricia smiled. "The HOA has a contract with Seattle Towing. They won't touch a vehicle belonging to the HOA president without board approval." I was outmaneuvered. After 30 minutes of fruitless argument, I returned home, seething with frustration. Monday morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, specifically citing Washington state laws regarding reasonable access to community amenities. I also consulted an attorney, Nancy Rodriguez, who specialized in property disputes. "This is textbook overreach," Nancy said after reviewing my documents. "But HOA disputes can be lengthy and expensive. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm not backing down," I replied. "This is my property, my boat, and my right." Nancy nodded approvingly. "Then let's start with a cease and desist letter. If that doesn't work, we'll escalate." The letter had no effect. The following Saturday, Patricia was again blocking the ramp, this time accompanied by Gordon and another board member, Deanne Foster. They'd brought lawn chairs and a cooler, making it clear they were prepared for a long standoff. "This is absurd," I told them, standing in the morning drizzle. "You're preventing legitimate use of community property." Deanne, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The board is just trying to enforce community standards, Brian. By camping out at the boat ramp every weekend," I countered. "Show me where that's in the covenants." Gordon stepped forward. "We've documented your harassment of the board, Mr. Quentin." Another outburst and we'll be forced to issue fines for disruptive behavior. I looked at the gathering crowd of neighbors. Is everyone okay with this? They're blocking access that we all pay for through our HOA dues. Most avoided eye contact, but Nelson spoke up. "He's right." "This has gone too far, Patricia." Patricia's face hardened. "I've been meaning to discuss your unapproved garden shed, Nelson. I believe it exceeds our square footage limitations by about 8 inches. Nelson fell silent and the message was clear. Challenge Patricia, face retribution. Over the next month, the pattern continued. Every Saturday and Sunday, Patricia and at least one board member would block the boat ramp from before dawn until sunset. My attorney sent increasingly stern letters, all of which were ignored or countered with accusations that I was the one harassing the board. I began documenting everything, taking photos, recording conversations when legal, and keeping detailed notes of every interaction. Nancy advised me to build a case for a potential lawsuit. The situation escalated when Patricia started issuing fines, $250 for attempting to violate watercraft restrictions, $500 for verbally abusing board members, and $750 for inciting community discord. Within 3 weeks, I'd accumulated $3,500 in fines that I refused to pay. "They're placing a lien on your property," Nancy warned after receiving notification from the HOA's attorney. "This is getting serious, Brian." I was reaching my breaking point. My weekends, once spent peacefully fishing or cruising the lake, were now consumed by this absurd standoff. My boat sat unused in my driveway, collecting pollen and bird droppings. The turning point came in late July, during a heat wave that sent temperatures soaring into the 90s. I'd spent the morning photographing Patricia's blockade when I noticed a commotion at the community swimming dock. A child had fallen off and was struggling in the water. The father jumped in, but he too was in distress. I sprinted to my boat, which was still on its trailer, and quickly launched from the emergency access point, a narrow, rarely used ramp designated for fire and rescue that wasn't technically part of the HOA-controlled area. Within minutes, I reached the swimmers and helped them aboard my boat. The child was fine, just scared, but the father had swallowed water and was coughing badly. I brought them back to shore where thankfully they both recovered quickly, surrounded by relieved neighbors. As I secured my boat to the emergency dock, Patricia approached. "That access point is for emergency services only," she said coldly. "This will be another fine." The gathered neighbors fell silent in disbelief. "A child was drowning," I replied, incredulous. "You're not a lifeguard or emergency personnel," she countered. "You should have called 911. The child's mother, still wrapped in a towel, stepped forward. "He saved my son, Patricia, for God's sake." Patricia was unmoved. "Rules exist for a reason. If we make exceptions, that's enough." The voice belonged to Elaine Schmidt, an elderly resident who rarely attended HOA meetings. "I've sat on the boards of 3 HOAs before moving here, and I've never seen such abuse of power. I'm calling for an emergency community meeting to review the board's actions." Patricia's face flushed. "You don't have the authority." "Actually, she does," said Nelson, who had appeared with a copy of the bylaws. "Article 7, Section 3. Any homeowner can call for a review meeting with signatures from 20% of community members. I've already got 15 signatures here." The community meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening. Nearly every homeowner attended, crammed into the small clubhouse by the pool. Patricia arrived with Gordon and a man she introduced as Xavier Phillips, the HOA's attorney. Elaine moderated the meeting, allowing residents to voice their concerns. One by one, neighbors shared stories of Patricia's intimidation tactics, excessive fines for minor infractions, selective enforcement of rules, and personal vendettas against those who questioned her authority. When it was my turn, I presented my documentation of the boat ramp blockades, including time-stamped photos and recorded conversations. "The board has no legal right to physically prevent access to community amenities," I explained. "And the watercraft restriction was never properly ratified according to our own bylaws." Xavier Phillips attempted to counter my arguments, citing board discretion in emergency rulemaking, but several residents who had served on previous boards challenged his interpretation. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence in the current board, and a new election was scheduled for the following month. Patricia stormed out before the results were announced, but not before threatening legal action against the community for defamation and breach of contract. The new rule seemed dead in the water, and that Saturday, I arrived at the boat ramp expecting clear access for the first time in months. Instead, I found Patricia's Mercedes blocking the ramp as usual, but this time with a new addition: a heavy chain and padlock securing her vehicle to the boat dock. "This is private property now," she declared when I approached. "I've filed for an injunction protecting the ramp until the legal matters are resolved." "The ramp belongs to the community," I argued. "Not according to the original property survey," she replied. "This section actually falls on the property line between lots 12 and 13. The HOA has been using it by informal agreement, not legal right." She was making things up as she went along, but I couldn't risk damaging her vehicle or the chain. I called Nancy, who advised me to document everything but avoid confrontation until she could review the property records. This went on for another 2 weekends, with Patricia maintaining her blockade despite the community's clear opposition. The situation was becoming untenable. "We need to involve the authorities," Nancy said after reviewing the survey maps. "She's completely fabricated this property line claim. The boat ramp is clearly on common property according to the original development plans." "Will the police even get involved in an HOA dispute?" I asked. "Not typically for rule violations," she admitted, "but physically blocking access and falsely claiming ownership. That's another matter." The following Saturday, I arrived at the boat ramp with Nancy and 2 officers from the King County Sheriff's Department. Patricia was in her usual position, Mercedes blocking the ramp, chain in place. "Madam, we've received complaints about unauthorized blockage of access," one officer explained. Patricia was unfazed. "I'm the HOA president and this is a community dispute about rule enforcement. It's a civil matter, not criminal." Nancy stepped forward with documentation. "Officers, Miss Wilson has no legal authority to block this ramp. The property is community-owned according to county records, and she's been informed of this repeatedly." The officers reviewed the documents, but seemed reluctant to intervene in what they still viewed as a neighborhood squabble. They advised Patricia that she should move her vehicle but didn't order her to do so, suggesting we resolve the matter through proper HOA channels. "We're trying," I explained, frustrated. "There's a new board election in 2 weeks." "Then wait for the process," the second officer suggested before they departed. Patricia's triumphant expression said it all. She believed she was untouchable, but Lake Washington isn't just governed by HOAs. It falls under the jurisdiction of multiple authorities, including the Harbor Patrol, a specialized unit of law enforcement responsible for waterway safety and access. Nancy made some calls, and the following day, a Sunday when Patricia was again blocking the ramp, a Harbor Patrol boat approached our community dock. 2 officers in uniform stepped ashore and walked directly to Patricia's blockade. "Madam, we've received multiple reports of obstruction of a waterway access point," the senior officer, Lieutenant Mark Danvers, stated. Patricia repeated her claim about property disputes and HOA authority, but Lieutenant Danvers was better prepared than the sheriff's deputies had been. "This boat ramp is registered with King County as a community access point to a public waterway," he explained. "Blocking it is a violation of navigation access laws, regardless of any HOA disputes." "I'm not in the water," Patricia argued. "My car is on land, which is HOA property." "Your blockade prevents water access," the second officer clarified. "That falls under our jurisdiction. You need to remove your vehicle immediately." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flash across Patricia's face. "I'll need to consult our attorney. You can do that after moving your vehicle," Lieutenant Danvers interrupted. "Now, please." Patricia reluctantly unlocked the chain and moved her Mercedes, glaring at me as the Harbor Patrol officers supervised. Once the ramp was clear, Lieutenant Danvers approached me. "You should be able to launch now," he said. "If she blocks it again, call us directly. Here's my card." I thanked him profusely and immediately began preparing my boat for launch, half expecting Patricia to create another obstacle. But she remained in her car, phone pressed to her ear, presumably calling Xavier Phillips for legal advice. For the first time in months, I spent the afternoon on the water. The simple pleasure of feeling the breeze and watching the Seattle skyline from the lake nearly brought tears to my eyes. This was why I'd bought my home for moments like this. My victory was short-lived. Tuesday morning, I received a certified letter from Xavier Phillips threatening legal action for fraudulently involving maritime authorities in a private property dispute. The letter claimed I had misrepresented the situation and demanded I sign a statement admitting there was no actual obstruction. Nancy advised me to ignore it. It's intimidation, nothing more. They have no case. The following weekend, I arrived at the boat ramp to find not Patricia's Mercedes, but a makeshift barrier of sawhorses and plywood with "closed for maintenance" painted in large red letters. Patricia stood nearby, clipboard in hand, inspecting the ramp with exaggerated concern. "We've discovered structural issues with the concrete," she announced when I approached. "Safety first, of course." I took photos of the barrier and the perfectly intact ramp. "When was this inspection conducted and by whom?" "The board hired a contractor," she replied vaguely. "The report is being finalized." I called Lieutenant Danvers, who arrived within 30 minutes. He inspected the barrier and questioned Patricia about the supposed structural concerns. "We'll need to see the engineering report and permits for any repair work," he said. Patricia fumbled through an explanation about emergency safety measures not requiring prior permits, but Lieutenant Danvers wasn't convinced. "Without documentation from a certified engineer identifying specific safety hazards, you can't block a registered water access point," he stated firmly. "Remove the barrier now, or you'll be cited for obstruction." Seething, Patricia had Gordon and Deanne dismantle the sawhorses while she made another call to Xavier. The situation was escalating beyond reason, and I worried what Patricia might try next. Nancy suggested we file for a restraining order, but first we needed to document a pattern of harassment. That pattern became clearer the following day when my boat, which I'd left moored at my private dock, was discovered with its engine cover open and water in the fuel tank. Security cameras on my property had mysteriously stopped recording during the night. I filed a police report, but without evidence, there was little they could do. Still, the officer who took my statement seemed familiar with the ongoing dispute. "We've received several calls about your HOA president," he confided. "She's developing quite a reputation with local law enforcement." The next weekend marked a breaking point. I arrived at the ramp early Saturday to find Patricia had parked a rented moving truck diagonally across the entire launch area. When Lieutenant Danvers arrived in response to my call, Patricia produced a rental agreement showing she had legitimate business use of the vehicle. "I'm moving some community property from the storage shed," she claimed, though no items were being moved and the truck was clearly positioned to maximize blockage. Lieutenant Danvers issued a citation for improper parking, but explained he couldn't force her to move a legally rented vehicle if she claimed to be using it for legitimate purposes. However suspicious the timing might be, as soon as he left, Patricia's smug smile returned. "The Harbor Patrol can't be here 24/7, Mr. Quentin. I, however, have nothing but time." This cat and mouse game continued for another 2 weekends. Patricia found increasingly creative ways to block the ramp, a gardening crew with equipment spread across the access, a scheduled power washing of the concrete, even a children's sailing lesson using the ramp area, though no boats actually entered the water. Each time, I documented the obstruction and called Harbor Patrol, but they could only intervene when the blockage clearly violated waterway access laws. Patricia was becoming expert at creating blockades that operated in a gray area. The HOA election couldn't come soon enough. When the day finally arrived, turnout was unprecedented. 27 of the 28 homeowners attended, with the 28th submitting a proxy vote. Patricia arrived flanked by Xavier and Gordon, her face a mask of confidence despite the obvious community sentiment against her. The results were decisive. Patricia, Gordon, and Deanne were voted out, replaced by Nelson, Elaine, and myself. The community delivered a clear mandate for change. Patricia refused to acknowledge the results, claiming procedural irregularities. As we attempted to conclude the meeting, she stood and addressed the group. "This illegal coup will not stand," she declared. "As the legitimate president of this association, I am invalidating these results pending legal review. Any actions taken by these imposters will result in personal liability." Xavier attempted to support her claims, but several homeowners who were attorneys themselves challenged his interpretation of our bylaws. The meeting ended in chaos, with Patricia refusing to turn over HOA records or access to accounts. "We'll need to get a court order," Nelson sighed as we gathered afterward to discuss next steps. The following Saturday, I arrived at the boat ramp expecting another blockade, despite our electoral victory. Sure enough, Patricia's Mercedes was there, but with a new addition, a large concrete planter that must have weighed several hundred pounds, positioned directly in the center of the ramp. "This is community beautification," she explained when I confronted her. "The new board hasn't officially taken control yet according to our attorney, so I'm implementing previously approved landscaping improvements." I called Lieutenant Danvers, who had become all too familiar with our situation. When he arrived, his patience had clearly worn thin. "Miss Wilson, this is a clear violation of waterway access regulations," he stated. "That planter creates a navigation hazard and must be removed immediately." "It's on land, not in the water," she argued. "It blocks the designated launch path to the water," he countered. "You know this. We've been through it multiple times." "I'll need proper documentation of this supposed violation," she insisted. Lieutenant Danvers had come prepared. He produced a copy of the county waterway access regulations and pointed to the relevant section. "Your obstruction violates Section 47.2. Remove it now, or I'll cite you for willful obstruction of a navigable waterway access, which carries a $1,000 fine." Patricia crossed her arms. "Go ahead and cite me. Xavier will have it dismissed by Monday." Lieutenant Danvers took out his citation book, but then paused. "Miss Wilson, this would be your third citation for essentially the same offense. Are you aware that, under county ordinance, a third willful violation escalates to criminal obstruction?" For the first time, Patricia looked uncertain. "That's ridiculous. This is private property." "With a public waterway access easement," he corrected. "Criminal obstruction can result in arrest, not just a citation." Patricia faltered momentarily but then doubled down. "You're bluffing. This isn't a criminal matter." Lieutenant Danvers spoke into his radio, requesting backup and a supervisor. Within 20 minutes, a harbor patrol boat arrived carrying Lieutenant Danvers' superior, Captain Reynolds. After reviewing the situation and the history of citations, Captain Reynolds approached Patricia. "Miss Wilson, this is your final opportunity to remove this obstruction voluntarily." "I'm exercising my rights as a property owner and HOA president," she insisted. Captain Reynolds nodded to Lieutenant Danvers, who took out his handcuffs. "Patricia Wilson, you're under arrest for criminal obstruction of a navigable waterway access, a violation of King County Code 47.2.3. The color drained from Patricia's face as Lieutenant Danvers recited her Miranda rights. Neighbors had gathered to watch the unfolding drama, many recording with their phones as Patricia was escorted to the harbor patrol boat. "You can't do this," she shouted. "Xavier, call the chief." "Call the mayor." Xavier, who had arrived midway through the confrontation, looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, I think you should comply for now. We'll sort this out at the station." As the harbor patrol boat departed with Patricia in custody, a cheer erupted from the gathered neighbors. Gordon and Deanne, watching from a distance, quietly retreated to their homes. A county maintenance crew arrived shortly after to remove the planter, which turned out to be empty and made of lightweight concrete heavy enough to appear immovable but actually designed to be relocated easily. The entire blockade had been theatrical. Just like Patricia's authority. Patricia spent 6 hours in custody before being released on her own recognizance. The charges were serious enough to require a court appearance, but not so severe as to warrant extended detention. Still, the community buzzed with the news of her arrest. The following week, Xavier Phillips contacted Nelson as the new HOA president, requesting a meeting to resolve outstanding matters amicably. The tone had shifted dramatically from threatening to conciliatory. At the meeting, Xavier presented Patricia's terms. She would acknowledge the new board and turn over all HOA records and accounts if the community agreed not to pursue civil action against her for mismanagement or harassment. She also requested a letter stating the community would not support criminal charges related to the boat ramp incidents. "We can't interfere with criminal proceedings," I pointed out. "That's up to the prosecutor's office." Xavier nodded grimly. Patricia is facing potential criminal charges, a substantial fine, and legal fees. She's also concerned about her reputation. She's willing to formally resign and sell her home if an accommodation can be reached. Nelson, Elaine, and I conferred privately. We had no interest in prolonging the conflict, but needed to ensure Patricia couldn't cause further problems. "We'll agree not to pursue civil claims if she immediately relinquishes all HOA material, resigns officially, and agrees in writing never to serve on the board again," Nelson offered. "We can also provide a letter stating the community considers the matter resolved from our perspective, though we can't control what the prosecutor does." Xavier accepted these terms, and within days, Patricia had signed the necessary documents and turned over all HOA records. The financial audit that followed revealed concerning irregularities, selective enforcement of fines, undocumented emergency expenditures, and board stipends that hadn't been approved by the community. The King County prosecutor ultimately proceeded with the criminal obstruction case despite our letter. Patricia pleaded no contest to a reduced charge and received a suspended sentence, community service, and a substantial fine. 3 weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. Within a month, she had sold her home and moved away, reportedly to a condominium in downtown Seattle, notably one without an HOA. The following summer marked my first full season of unobstructed lake access. The new board, with Nelson as president, Elaine as vice president, and myself as treasurer, implemented transparent processes for rule changes, enforcement, and financial management. We even organized community boating events and fishing tournaments using the now accessible boat ramp. One perfect July evening, as I returned from a sunset cruise, I noticed Nelson waiting on the dock to help me moor my boat. "Good day on the water?" he asked, catching the line I tossed. "The best," I replied, securing the stern line. "Peaceful," Nelson chuckled. "You know, I almost miss the drama sometimes." "Almost," I laughed. "I'll take boring and functional over dramatic and dysfunctional any day." "Cheers to that," he agreed. Though I have to admit, watching Patricia get arrested was pretty satisfying. "Justice served," I said, stepping onto the dock. "And not just for me, but for everyone she bullied and intimidated." Nelson nodded. "The community's stronger for having stood up to her. People talk to each other now, look out for one another." He was right. Patricia's reign of terror had ultimately brought us closer together. The HOA still had rules, necessary ones for maintaining property values and community standards, but they were now enforced fairly and transparently. As we walked up from the dock, I glanced back at my boat, resting peacefully on the gentle lake waves. It had become a symbol of something larger than recreation, a reminder that standing up to petty tyrants, even in the confined world of an HOA, was worth the fight. The new owners of Patricia's house, a young family with 2 small children, waved as they passed us on their evening walk. They had checked the HOA rules carefully before buying, their realtor had told us, concerned about stories they'd heard about the previous regime. We assured them those days were over. Lake Washington sparkled in the fading light as neighbors gathered on decks and docks, enjoying the summer evening without fear of arbitrary fines or confrontations. My boat would be back on the water tomorrow, and the next day, and every weekend I chose just as it should have been all along.